Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Director of the Ronald Reagan Institute, Roger Zakheim.
All right, we're at the end of this day. We have one last important piece of the program, so I'd ask you all to take your seats so we could commence on time, because our guests have limited availability, and we're excited to have them here and want to make sure we maximize the opportunity. So, good afternoon, everyone. It is my honor to introduce our guest for the closing session of today's National Security Innovation Base Summit, Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota. Senator Rounds is a distinguished public servant and a leading voice on national security and defense policy issues. He serves, as you all know, on the Senate Armed Services Committee and is a passionate advocate for a strong national defense. And a couple things about Senator Rounds which are very important to know. Before he was a senator, he was a governor. And as a governor, he is less interested in Washington inside the Beltway talk and focus a lot more on production. What do we have to show for it? And I know that's been a focus of a lot of people in the room throughout today, those sitting in the audience and those on stage. And I know that's the lens through which I expect Senator Rounds will evaluate our work and the work of the Department of Defense. What do we have to show of it? Now, leading the conversation, engaging this fireside chat with Senator Rounds is Ms. Jennifer Griffin. You know her as the Chief National Security Correspondent at Fox News Channel, and she is well equipped to engage with the Senator on issues of national defense and, of course, the National Security Innovation-Based Summit. So with that, Senator Jen, please take the stage.
Thank you, Roger. And how about this inaugural summit on innovation? Let's have a round of applause for Roger Zakheim.
Here, here.
Organizers. So I'm Jennifer Griffin with Fox News. I work at the Pentagon. I've been there for the last 15 years, and I'm so glad to be here with Senator Rounds. As Roger mentioned, he's not only on the Senate Armed Services Committee, he's also on the Select Intelligence Committee in the Senate, and the Banking Committee, which until this week we didn't realize was such a national security issue. Senator Rounds also is the top Republican on the SASC subcommittee on cybersecurity, and he's the co-chair of the Senate AI caucus. So he is well positioned for all of the issues that have been addressed here today.
I'm third grade level right now, folks, so let's just be honest about this.
So let's start with some breaking news. First of all, we've just learned that a Russian Sukhoi 27 has nicked a MQ-9 Reaper. What's interesting about the Reaper, the drone, it was over the Black Sea. If you haven't been, you've been here, so you may not know, but it was flying near Crimea, and these two Russian pilots, not only did they harass this drone, they dumped fuel on top of the drone, and then the U.S. military had to bring it down into international waters. What's interesting about the MQ-9, you may remember, is it took Congress telling the Air Force that it needed to invest in drones. So the MQ-9 has a special place in terms of innovation, but I'd just like to get your reaction to what happened today in the Black Sea.
Pissed off. I mean, let's just be honest about this for a second. The report coming out of our government is that this was an unprofessional act and environmentally unsound. I'm sorry, folks, they shot down a United States warplane. They took it out of action, and that's the response we get back. So, yeah, not very happy about it. And the bottom line is we cannot allow that to happen. This is a case of where our allies and our adversaries should understand that we're not putting up with this. This is a very serious international action, and it has to be dealt with accordingly. This is not a case of where don't do it again. You hurt our feelings. This is a case of where you took out an asset that we had. And I fully expect that there will be a stronger letter to follow this very nice comment, as we put it, because we sure wouldn't want to hurt anybody's feelings other than to tell them that they've done something environmentally inappropriate. So I'm not exactly happy with the first response on it, and I think we're probably going to have a little bit stronger discussion about how serious this is. You do not take out aircraft. That is something that is absolutely a violation of international norms, if nothing else. But in this particular case, more has to come.
Given what's happened this week in Silicon Valley with SVB, where many tech innovators had their money, grade the Biden administration on its response so far.
There's two parts to this. First of all, I think it was very important that we respond so that depositors, these are not the people that had money in the bank where they were owners of the bank, or people that had loaned money to the bank in terms of bondholders and so forth, but people that had put their money into the bank trusting that the bank was solid and they could take the money back out again. We wanted to make sure that they were held harmless. The $250,000, quite frankly, is not adequate for most businesses. Most businesses that are out there that are growing are going to have more money in the bank just to make payroll at the end of the month. And so I have no disagreement with making those individuals whole. Second piece on this that we have to work through yet is if we're going to make that a public policy in the future, we'd better be able to pay for it. So I think this is something that needs to come back to Congress. We have to be able to lay out, and I'm not disagreeing with the goal, but if you're going to say that deposits will now be guaranteed in one bank or two banks or all banks, that we'd better have a plan in place to be able to say how we're going to pay the bill for it. I'm not sure if the assessment plan that they've got right now is necessarily the correct way to go. This may be a case of where for the next several months we're going to have some organizations that, because of this very high inflation trend that we're in, at a time in which the Fed has increased interest rates because that's the only tool they have. That's the only tool they have to fight inflation. It's a blunt force instrument. And when they do that and they bring up those levels of interest, those banks that had thought that they had done a fairly good job of investing their money in government securities, T-bonds that were of a longer duration, suddenly discovered that now, oh gee, we've got, in this particular case, folks who are in the innovation section. These are entrepreneurs who have venture capital with them. They suddenly had to start taking some money out to pay their bills at an inflated rate because the costs of everything have gone up. And as they've taken out those deposits, they found themselves short of cash in the bank. Now, they had the asset, but the asset, when they liquidated it, was worth less money. So now they end up, in this particular case, this bank about $1.8 billion short in capital, and they got themselves in trouble. When that happens, I think the best thing to do, not because of the bank, but because of all of those holders, those folks that have deposits in the bank, need to make them whole and stop the run on the banks. The second piece is absolutely all of the assets that were owned by the investors in the bank, those are absolutely gone. They're gone. Let's take a deep breath. Let's get past the emergency here, and then let's figure out whether or not we really want to guarantee every single deposit in the future, or if we want to say for the next several months we're going to have it, and then we're going to look at a long-term plan. But I do think $250,000 for most businesses is a small number, and there maybe has to be some sort of an insurance plan for those that they can acquire if they want.
At what point does this become a national security issue? Is this actually a bailout? There's been a lot of debate about that term, and will Congress have to do more?
This is appropriate regulatory intervention, and it is an intervention which needed to be done. It's what we plan on doing. It is one of the things that provides for the ability for businesses to know that that they can get in and the money that they put into seed or into deposits is safe. The question will be, what is the upper limit that you should, and at what point do you have responsible businesses that have the ability to move assets around on a regular basis to spread the risk themselves? So you don't want them to not be spreading the risk in terms of putting all of their eggs in one basket, so to speak, in one bank. But there is a limit when you're talking operating about when you've got to move assets back and forth and around when you're doing payroll and paying your month-end expenses. It's not unreasonable to have several $100,000 in payroll at the end of a month. And it just so happens that this happens at the beginning of this particular month at a time in which payroll is getting ready to go out.
You know, it's interesting, given the discussion here this morning, one of the reasons so many in the startup space went to SVB in the first place was because that it can be so challenging to get capital from the largest banks. How can Congress work to ensure that this very important sector of the economy, investors like you have here from the tech sector, have access to capital so they can continue to innovate, because that's why we're here to talk about innovations, and keep the U.S. competitive?
Yeah, really good question. One of the items that we did in 2018 was Senate Bill 2155. We modified Dodd-Frank, and in doing so, we allowed the Fed and FDIC and so forth the ability to tailor the way that they looked at different banks and to ask for either more information or to relax certain guidelines based on what they thought the risk was. Specifically, if you're going in and you're using venture capital and you're specific and you've got a lot of folks using venture capital, and it's concentrated in a couple of these banks, maybe they needed to look more closely at the liquidity that was being held. Maybe they needed to ask for a little bit more liquidity rather than long-term debt. Should have been short-term, should have been held a little bit more closely. That meant that the rate of return would have been less, meaning less profit, a little bit higher cost involved, but you would have had more liquidity. Those are the types of things, and I think Michael Barr and the Chairman Jerome Powell have both indicated that they're going to do a review and they're going to look at this being critical of themselves as far as whether or not, using the tools they've got right now, did they do a good job of properly regulating specifically this bank and the other banks that right now are seen to be at risk.
And back to the national security issue, of course, China's watching, Russia's watching, and now they have a playbook for how to take down a U.S. bank. What do you do to protect against this happening again?
You fix this and you show that you can respond quickly. And you show that you are resilient and you can bounce back.
Yeah.
And the other piece on this is to show the individual customers of that bank that, number one, you don't have to put all your eggs in one basket, but if you do find yourself putting cash in, that there is still a guideline under the regulatory layout we have in the United States to protect you during a time like this. They were able to, well, look, this thing went down over a period of 4 days. And in that 4-day time period, all of these customers are being made whole.
Yeah.
Now, that's pretty good.
That's pretty fast.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's Silicon Valley fast. So let's talk
Well,
about
it's not Washington, D.C. fast.
No, not usually.
No.
Pentagon budget released yesterday, $842 billion, somewhat eye-catching. Historic R&D request for advanced networks, AI, something important to you. Largest ever innovation and modernization budget, $145 billion for critical technology, $1.4 billion for the JADC, Joint All-Domain Command and Control, $687 billion for the Rapid Defense Experimentation Reserve. That's almost double what it was last year. $1.8 billion for AI. What's your response? Is this big enough? There are some of your colleagues who say it's too big. Some say it's not big enough. Where do you fall on this defense budget in terms of innovation?
We'll take it apart, and we will look to find out where they've done a good job and where they need to look at either inflationary trends that have not been met. Payroll may very well be a bigger issue than we realize. Second piece on this is the costs for everything in the supply chain have gone up. Have they measured that? Have we actually got an increase, or did we get a decrease out of this in terms of actual buying dollars? But we'll work our way through it. The other piece, where's the ammo? And how much ammo are we buying? And are we buying enough to recognize, after what we've seen in Ukraine, the need that actually occurs? You know, policymakers, when they take a look at this and they try to figure out how much ammo we should have on hand, they're expecting that we're going to be extremely proficient and accurate. So if you take an M777 and you put it on out, you're going to take one shot and you kill something. What happens when you lose your overhead? What happens when you lose the ability to use GPS? What happens when you've got to do multiple rounds? How quickly do you go through it compared to what you're finding they're going through in Ukraine right now. Those are the types of things that we're going to have to take a look at. And the other piece on this is that, let's be honest, the tool that we're going to want a lot more of is going to be a B-21. B-21 can be used for multiple types of platforms. It can be used not just as a bomber, but it can be used for reconnaissance. May very well have other uses in the future that we don't talk about today. The types of tools that we will use that on, the types of weapon systems that we'll put on that, vast majority have not been developed yet today. This will have a lifespan of over 50 years. And during that time period, we know one thing. When we start to build a product and we stop the production line, it's really tough to start it again. This product was designed to be innovated on and to be plug and play, so to speak, where you can put new parts on, take parts off, put new pieces into it. Let's start out by acknowledging that none of us really believe that 100 of these particular platforms is going to be enough to meet the need when you have both Russia and China as near-peer competitors.
Let's talk about Ukraine. Do you agree with Governor DeSantis, who spoke in Iowa yesterday, that supporting Ukraine is not in the U.S. national security interest?
I would disagree with him in that regard. I think we have a couple of things going on right now. Number one, and this is a policy-induced issue, we left Afghanistan and we looked like crap to the rest of the world. We left our allies hanging out. And they've looked at us saying, are you really serious? Can we really trust that you're going to stay where you're at? Number two, it wasn't very far after that we've now got Putin saying, maybe now's the right time in this particular condition to make my move into Ukraine. And let's just find out whether or not, since clearly they're pulling back in. So if we're going to be sheepish on this and we're going to be careful not to intervene, he's not afraid of that. He's the bear. And they're going to see this as an opportunity. China is watching this. Xi Jinping is, in my opinion, a very intelligent man. And he is watching everything going on. He saw what happened in Afghanistan. He saw what happened in Ukraine. And he's wondering whether or not this coalition that we put together is good for a year, or is it good for a year and a half, or is it good for 2 years, or is it good for the long haul? And if that's the case, that's going to make him think about whether or not he really wants to go back in and go after Taiwan now, or in 27, or in 30, or perhaps there's a better way to it. He doesn't want to lose face. He doesn't want to get into a real knockdown drag-out. So,
But do you think this does Ukraine and Russia's losses so far, does it accelerate his time frame with regards to Taiwan, or does it give him pause?
I'm not sure we have the answer to that yet. Look, the one thing we know is they believe in the art of war, and the one thing they're not going to do is to tell us when they're going to attack, and they're not going to tell us how we're going to attack, and they most certainly would like to have another distraction before they attack.
Like a balloon?
Well, and once again, here's a case, and this is, I'm going to sound like I'm being critical, and maybe I am. That balloon, we saw, we know where it came from. We followed it. It was a political decision not to take it down before it got into the United States. It may very well have been a case of where if wouldn't have been local folks seeing it, this administration may never have told us about it, because they really wanted to have a meeting with the Secretary of State in China. And they see this as something that probably really messed that up. So if they could have just ignored it, come back in and shook their finger at them when they got over there, that's one thing. But this was a very serious miscalculation, I believe, by the administration. Should have taken that balloon out as soon as it came close to our airspace.
But it also might have woken up the nation, because now every person across the United States looks up in the air and has a symbol for what China's been doing for quite some time.
Yeah, look, they're
spying.
They're looking at us. Another good example. China wanted to buy farmland in North Dakota. Just so happened to have been right by a very sensitive Air Force base before it put up a corn wet milling plant. Sorry, but that's not the reason why they were doing it, but you can put up a lot of structure and you can hide a lot of things in a structure, particularly if you're looking and listening and trying to figure out what's going on and how our systems are utilized, what our communications sound like, and so forth. So, yeah, look, bottom line, they are a real competitor for us, and we're letting them in.
Let's go back to Ukraine. Why is it a good investment to be sending weapons, and what is the innovation that you're seeing from the committees you sit on? What is happening? We heard earlier today about the MacGyver effect and taking naval-based harpoons and 2 weeks later sinking Russian ships. Talk about the innovation that you see happening with groups, some of whom are here today, on the battlefield there. That's really the unwritten story of this Ukraine conflict. It's one big R&D zone, from what I can tell.
In my opinion, it is a confirmation of what happened in a different conflict just a year earlier. The Nagorno-Karabakh War between Azerbaijan and Armenia. John Antal, a retired colonel, wrote a book called 7 Seconds to Die. And he went through this war that occurred in the fall of 2020. And he lays out what these two countries, who basically had organizations that were set up similar to what we might have had during the Korean War, but what they did, what Azerbaijan did, was started to use drones supplied by Turkey and loitering munitions supplied by Israel. And what they did was created a kill chain that literally didn't need a human in the loop. And they came across and went into this area, and they destroyed literally 1,000 pieces of equipment that Armenia had dug in to protect this area of conflict between the two nations. And in a very short period of time, using drones and using munitions that were designed to go one way, communicate with one another, pick out areas in a defined kill zone, and then pick out which type of munition to hit which type of target without ever having a human make a decision once they were sent out. We learned from that, and most certainly our near-peer adversaries have learned from that. In Ukraine, you found the same thing happening. What you found is drones really do work. And you found out also that if you had really good overhead, you could identify positions that were fixed. You could also identify targets that were moving if you had a way to get in and ambush them. Ukraine had access to good intel, continues to have access to good intel, not just from allies of ours and ourselves, but they also used commercially available assets right now on gathering intelligence. They're using commercial satellites for finding information. They're using communications that are commercially available right now, and it's working. They were innovating along the way. They also found out that they could use something that was designed to go air or ground to ground or air to ground, and they could use it to take out ships that were on the sea. So yeah, it's been very innovative, but it has been because of the hardships they found themselves in, and the fact that they really were not prepared for what they thought. Most of them never thought that their neighbor, their relatives, would attack them. And what they found out is these guys are brutal, and the rest of the world doesn't think about war the way that maybe we think about war, and that it'll never happen. As far as they're concerned, it's a part of it, and they've changed political boundaries by using war for generations. And a lot of these folks that are in Russia right now see this as the way that they're going to fix their boundaries to what they want. And it's a normal part of human interaction, and it's not. But according to them, it is.
So part of the report card that was issued as part of the summit today talks about doing business with the Pentagon. Customer clarity got a D. Why is it so hard to do business with the government and with the Pentagon?
No, let's not call them customer clarity. The bottom line is if the federal government wants something, the federal government ought to say what they want. I mean, that's the bottom line. Let's be clear. If we need a missile, let's say we need a missile. Let's not call it an object which flies through the air, which has a propellant designed on it, okay? Let's call it what it is. And sometimes we're not very good about that. We ought to get back to the basics.
How can Congress help?
Number one, get our appropriations done on time, more than anything else. That would save billions of dollars. Number two, recognize that if you're going to expect the industrial base to innovate, they need to get paid for innovating. Next, if you're going to expect them to put a huge amount of of new capital in for a production line, it shouldn't be on a 1 year or a 2 year basis. You should tell them up front that you're going to do a contract, and the contract is going to run for an extended period of time, regardless of whether or not the political times change or the need specifically for that. The risk of having too much ammo should be on the federal government, not on someone who is building a supply line in order to get to it, or two supply lines to get to it.
Kath Hicks said yesterday when presenting the budget that 4 of the last 4 years of delays have come from having CRs in the last decade, since 2011. 4 years of lost time and money. What does Congress need to do to stop this CR madness? And is it time to stop having 1 year defense budgets? Should they be 5 years? Should they be longer so they're not caught up in this political cycle?
I think you could actually do multi-year appropriation plans and then do modifications to that 2 year or 3 year plan. The other piece on this that you've got to recognize is when we go through and we do these, you can have, there's no hammer to if we don't get the work done. It's just no big deal. But number one, you got to start out with an administration, and I'm not going to just point fingers at this administration. If the law says that there should be a budget ready to go in February, then put the damn budget together and get it out there. Yeah. I mean, look, we just got the president's budget, but people say, well, you don't pay any attention to it anyway. It's probably true. But you still got to do that before you can do your own budget under the existing laws that are there. The appropriators are trying their best to get the appropriation bills out. The other piece on this is we know that Republicans and Democrats are going to hold one piece hostage versus another. Defense versus, health and human services as an example. Okay, bring them together. You can do a tranche where you could do two or you could do a third of the budget at a time. And if you started right away on it, you could actually get that through the process and completed in September. That's the way it was supposed to work in the first place. We're just not very good at following it because nobody holds our feet to the fire.
Another report card finding had to do with talent base, D+, because the defense workplace is aging. Foreign talent pipeline is declining. There are visa obstacles. Is it time to come up with immigration reform that allows for greater talent to come into this country?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Our TFR, our total fertility rate in the United States is about 1.64 today. There is no evidence in the history of the world of a superpower remaining a superpower without a TFR, a fertility rate of 2.1. That's just maintaining your population. We can't maintain our own population without legal immigration. Can you imagine a world today if Albert Einstein had not been allowed to immigrate into the United States? Think about it. Would we have had a Manhattan Project? What would we have been like for a country today if we would not have recognized that there is a huge amount of talent outside of the United States? We need to get back to recognizing that there are people that can be very beneficial to our country, and we need a legal immigration system that works. Now, since I said immigration, I'm going to catch holy hell from my side of the aisle if I don't also say with a strong border. And the two should go together. Can you imagine any country ever surviving if they can't defend their own borders? Well, we need to have that. So let's talk about immigration, but let's talk about it in conjunction with strong borders. You have to have the talent. The other piece on this is we need to do everything we can to get back to actually providing an opportunity for kids to be able to afford to go to college or to technical schools. We broke the system. We broke it. Congress did back in the early 2000s. We used to have, and we recognized it was a national defense program, the Stafford Act. Anybody in here use the Stafford Act to pay for their education? I did. I don't know about anybody else. But the Stafford Act was the guaranteed student loan program. You could go on in, you could borrow them. It didn't matter if your folks had a little money or if they didn't have money, or if you were middle class. You had the Stafford Act available to you. You could borrow from your local bank. The loan was guaranteed. And then, okay, this makes sense now, right? Yeah. And then at the end of that time period, you'd pay it back, but you'd have 6 months after you got a job, basically, or after you're out of college. and then you'd start paying it back. We need that type of a system again today. For our national defense. We don't have that today. Not the way it's working today. Most kids that are middle class can't afford to go to college because their folks can't afford to send them. Particularly if there's 2 or 3 kids in the family. So yeah, I know a long-winded answer. Can I just
Of course.
let me expand on this a little bit? The items that I think we're going to have to face here in the very near future, and and the folks in this room are a part of it. Look, artificial intelligence is huge. It's here today. If you don't recognize it being here today, you're behind. Second of all, immigration has got to be addressed. No question about it all, and it's workforce issues. The other piece on this is computing, quantum computing and so forth is for real. You've got to recognize it and bring it directly in. You've got to recognize energy and the need for energy that we are not doing today. And it's a huge part of what we're just simply not doing a good job of talking about.
Before we go to questions, some of the biggest innovators and disruptors are in this room right now. What is your message to them?
Don't stop, number one. Second of all, don't be afraid to give us advice and to make recommendations to us. Don't give up on us, though. There really are, Republicans and Democrats alike. I will just share with you, in the United States Senate, we work together. We actually sit down together. We eat together. We go out for dinner together. We have a prayer breakfast together. We have Bible studies together. We actually get along. The challenge that we have is in this process, we spend more than half of all of our time simply doing approval of employees, nominees, okay? Matter of fact, we haven't had a single, well, 1 or 2 maybe, in this entire first year. We haven't had anything that we've actually passed in terms of legislation. It's all been, we're either doing judges or folks that are in the Department of Defense or in other departments of government that need to run through the Senate. And every one of them right now, because of our dysfunction, takes 2 votes to get through. So it's us, but don't give up on us. We really are trying. And when it comes to AI, I'll just tell you, we've got a really good group on AI in the Senate and in the House. They do as well. When you're talking about supply chains and so forth, we really do see that as another major part of the issue here. And we recognize that supply chains is something that we need to help with. We have a lot more work to do on it, but you need to share with us the shortcomings that you're finding. I think I lost one, right? I wore it out? Good. Is that better?
Great.
No? Yeah? Okay.
Is it better? Let's go to questions. Who would like to ask the first question? Great. And do you have a mic? Yes, there's a mic coming to you. And introduce yourself so we know who's speaking, please.
All right, Bill Chappell, Microsoft. You have a really interesting intersection of national security now in the AI caucus. How much do you worry that the assets that are emerging are on the wrong side of the ITARS barrier, that our soldiers are not allowed to use kind of what this American-paced revolution that's happening right now is spurring?
There are 2 parts to the question. First part is we worry about what's on the other side, but we also worry about our soldiers having access to equipment that gives them away and they don't even know about it. Best example, watches, the watches that are out there right now. Our adversaries basically can identify where they're at, which means they know where our guys are at. So we've got to be really careful about that. Those are the types of things that we worry about. But it is real and it is here, and innovating and getting that down to these kids, I call them kids, but these young people, they understand and they do a lot better job on innovating and using the systems once we get it to them. Sometimes the one thing that we worry about is we will never have enough talent available to us to compete with other countries who have 10 times as many people in there. But if we use the right type of IT tools and we integrate them with it, we can hold our own. Now, I'll just tell you, our cyber cores team and the young people that work on that, they have time and time again proven themselves absolutely up to the task. Whether we're talking about Hunt Forward, Hunt Forward is where we actually go into other countries that invite us in. We go through their government software and we pick out what the bad guys have put into their software. And then we share it with the rest of the world, which makes the cost to the bad guys a lot more because they've got to go back in and find new tools. So these kids are really bright, but we worry as much about them having, just nonchalantly using these items day to day and having it pinpoint where they're at and so forth and giving away information as much as anything else. If you're seeing areas where we're not allowing the use of new tools, that's where we've got to find it and push it forward. So if there are tools out there that you think we ought to be using and we're not using them today, that's where Congress needs to step in. And once again, we've got folks within the Pentagon that want to do it right, but sometimes it's like drinking out of a fire hose because the innovators in this country sometimes don't even see the applications that might be for the military, and sometimes the military does not see the applications that the innovator sees. Sometimes we need to be involved in that.
Okay, thank you for your service.
Does that make, okay?
Next, yes. This one at the back.
How can the debt limit be raised, and when it does, what will the implications be for national security? A lot of people in this room are very worried about Budget Control Act 2.0, which one might mark as sort of the beginning of at least 8 years of decline in the growth and ability of the Defense Department to address the emerging threat.
History says we can make that mistake. And what I hope history will also say is that sometimes we learn from our mistakes. The debt limit should be raised. I'm in favor of raising the debt limit. Let me be clear, this is one of the few opportunities we have to talk about actually getting a process in place where we can actually start slowing down the increases and appropriately managing the entire budget. You're talking about trillions of dollars every single year that are spent with nobody ever looking at it. Most of you probably realize this, but we only vote on about 28 to 30% of what we spend. We vote on the defense budget and we vote on the non-defense discretionary budget, but we don't vote on the mandatory portions of the budget, which include Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Now, if we were to bring that back under budget control once again, it doesn't necessarily mean, and in fact, I just basically guarantee you, we're not going to cut Social Security. But what we would do is find more innovative ways to deliver the product. The same with Medicare, and absolutely the same with Medicaid. But when you don't manage 2/3 of your budget, how in the world do you ever get it under control when the amount of the budget that you actually vote on, even if you could eliminate the entire defense budget and basically not fix the deficit. So this is an opportunity for us to talk about how serious it is that we actually continue to build an economy that will bring in more tax revenues, but at the same time slow down through appropriate management the outgoing costs that might very well be more efficiently delivered. But if you're not even voting on it, you're not managing it. And it's time we manage it. So that's the reason why I'm going to come back to this. I believe that we will be able to handle the debt limit, the increase in the debt limit as appropriate, but I think it won't be done without a real discussion about how we move forward. I'm not interested in something that hits just defense and non-defense discretionary. I can't support that because that's what happened last time, and very frankly, defense took it in the shorts and we haven't caught up yet.
We have about 1 minute left, so we have time for one last question, but a pretty quick one.
Thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us today. I'm just a law student at University of Virginia. Curious how you view the rollout of the CHIPS Act. Do you think it was a good idea? Do you think it's a bad idea? Do you think it's being implemented correctly? And additionally, do you see the possibility of additional programs of the kind of the CHIPS Act in other critical areas to national security?
Yeah, look, I voted against the CHIPS Act, but I was supporting the CHIPS Act right up until I got the language in it. I'm one of the guys that actually reads the damn bill. And what I found in it was so much stuff that was just noxious to me in terms of reports that had to be done by different organizations and keeping track of the types of individuals who were benefiting from it. And it was not based upon people based on their merit. It was based on either the color of their skin, their gender, their identity, and so forth, that to me it was off base. And it was literally hundreds of pages of expected reports and so forth. Could we do a CHIPS Act again? Yeah, we could. But if we do it again, I think with the House now under more conservative control, I think you'll find them getting more dollars on target, rather than what I saw as some stuff that was just simply put in it to satisfy folks that have a different point of view about where our focus should be. And I want as many people in this country as possible to be able to benefit and to contribute. And I think we ought to get back to the basics on that. Real simple. If you've got merit, you ought to be able to get the job. If you've got merit, you ought to be able to deliver to the country. And let's forget about this idea of numbers and where you're at and so forth. And unfortunately, what I saw in the CHIPS Act was a lot of that. And
But you agree there needs to be a CHIPS Act?
no question. No question about it. In fact, we tried to modify this one to actually put more dollars on target. They just simply wouldn't give us any opportunity to even have a vote in the Senate. That's wrong. We could have made it a better bill.
Well, I want to thank Senator Rounds for your discussion. It was a wonderful way to end the day, and thank everyone for being here, and thank Roger and the rest of the Reagan Institute and Library. And
Hey, one more thing. Don't you think she ought to anchor a news show and just call it Straight Facts? Huh?
No, thank you.
She could end it with, and that's the way it is.
Thank you very much, Senator. Okay.